Commercial property is so vital to every single business, and it's pretty much a requirement to even start your operations. In this video, we're going to be answering in detail what is commercial property insurance. So I know you guys are probably very positive people and you want to think this way, but I just want to paint a scenario for you. Imagine there was very serious flooding that happened in your neighborhood where you work out of, and you come to work one day and your entire building is underwater. And then I want you to imagine not having flood insurance and not having your property coverage covering floods. So we want to make sure that that does not happen to you and that you do not have to pay for anything out of pocket for any kind of property claim scenario. And you're going to want to stick around to the end, because at the end of this video, I'm going to go over the #1 mistake that business owners make when buying property insurance. So here's exactly what you're going to learn today: what commercial property insurance actually covers, who needs it and why, common exclusions and additional policies, and how to avoid the #1 coverage mistake. So what does commercial insurance actually cover? Well, what it covers is any physical asset or property within your business. It does not cover anything that's cyber. And cyber would mean anything like any kind of digital assets or expensive data. Commercial property only covers everything that's physical. And what is the breakdown for everything that's covered that's physical? Well, #1 is buildings. So whether you own the space or you lease it, the property coverage should cover the building and its replacement costs in case anything ever happens to it, like a fire, God forbid. So that way the building structure itself is protected. And then we have something called business personal property coverage, which is anything that would be inside of the building, like equipment and machinery, inventory, and fixtures and furniture. So equipment and machinery could be anything like computers to manufacturing assembly lines, or any high-value assets that are very critical to the functioning of your business. Inventory is super important to cover for retailers, distributors, and manufacturers because it represents a large portion of their capital, and without that inventory, they would have no business in the first place. Fixtures and furnitures are anything like desks, chairs, lighting fixtures, or anything of the sort. And here's a real-world example. Imagine there was a retail store that had fire damage and they lost $200,000 worth of inventory. Well, if they had the correct business personal property coverage, then in that case, their $200,000 in inventory would be completely replaced and they could operate as normal. Had they not had that coverage, they would have to replace that $200,000 worth of inventory out of pocket, and in some cases, that would bring business completely down, as it would involve debt for them to replace that inventory. So here are some businesses where it's essential to have property coverage. So restaurants is one of them, which have a lot of equipment and a lot of inventory in terms of raw food. Manufacturers and warehouses, which also house a lot of inventory and a lot of equipment. Retail stores, which have a ton of fixtures and a ton of inventory. And then professional offices, which have a lot of fixtures and potentially also a lot of equipment. But it's important to understand that basic property coverage does not cover every single piece of equipment in every single scenario that the damage could have happened in. And not all issues due to that property damage are covered. So here's an example. One thing that you can add as an additional endorsement that would cost a little bit of extra money on top of whatever you're paying for your property coverage would be something like business interruption insurance, which covers lost income and operating expenses due to a covered peril that forces a business to temporarily close. So for example, if you had fire damage to your business and it's going to take a month in order to fix that fire damage, well then during that month, that business interruption insurance would cover the average lost revenue that you would have had if you were operating. The next thing is equipment breakdown coverage. So this protects against the mechanical or electrical breakdown of machinery, boilers, HVAC systems, and other essential equipment for your operation. So let's say that we owned a restaurant and we had a freezer that broke down and we lost a ton of perishable goods or raw items, and that caused our business to actually slow down. Well, with equipment breakdown coverage, we'd be able to replace that broken freezer, and we'd be able to replace all of the inventory that had gone bad inside of it. Next is ordinance or law coverage, which covers costs to demolish, repair, or rebuild property to comply with updated building codes or ordinances after a covered loss. So let's say that you had a building with fire damage to it, and that building was no longer up to the current building codes. Well, what this coverage would cover is you being able to rebuild that old property, but with the updated building codes. So it'll cover any costs associated with you having to do that. The next thing is spoilage coverage. This would be good in a scenario if you had a restaurant with outdoor seating, for instance, and what it would cover is anything like fences, signage, landscaping or antennas, which is not usually covered under a standard property coverage policy. And by the way, if you're getting any value from this video so far and you need any kind of help in picking your property insurance and making sure that your business is properly protected, well then you should look into booking a call with us. My name is Alex Bongiev. I've written many insurance policies personally over a long period of time. And if you would like to book a call with me or my team, then go to quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol and we can see what we can do for you. So let's go over some common exclusions and see what's not typically covered under a property coverage policy. 3 of the major exclusions would be flood damage, earthquakes, and certain types of theft. And there's this big misconception where a lot of property coverage policies will be labeled that they're covered by all risks. And many business owners assume that all risks literally mean everything. And that's not always the case because typically there are some exceptions. And it's really important to read the fine print. And you could pretty much bet that the exclusions will be one or all of these 3. And if you're in an area that gets a lot of floods, like in Florida, you're going to want a separate flood policy for your business. If you're in an area that gets lots of earthquakes, like California, you're going to want to get a separate policy to cover you for earthquakes. And if you're in an area that has a lot of theft and crime, you're going to want to be covered separately for theft. And theft would usually be covered under crime insurance. And if you're not sure if you need any of these additional policies, well, then you should have a broker that actually looks into these things for you and determines whether that's important for you to add on or not. Another really important thing for you guys to think about when you're picking your property insurance that I suggest is to look into your policy limits and your valuations. You want to understand your policy limits and you want to ensure that your policy aligns with the value of your assets, and you want to make sure that it aligns with your assets value over time. Because a lot of the time, what happens is building values go up over time and equipment values actually go down over time. So you want to make sure that you and your broker check these valuations annually and make sure you adjust the limits annually as well so that you're not over or underpaying for your insurance and you're not over or underprotected as well. Also, another really important thing to consider as you grow is you may add other equipment. You may add other pieces of property to your property. You may add more inventory over time, and you want to make sure that those valuations and those policy limits start to go up to reflect all of this new stuff that you're adding into your business so that you're properly protected. You don't want to end up in a situation where in year 1 you only had $500,000 worth of property and you recovered for $500,000, and then now in year 2 or 3 you're at $1 million worth of property, but you're still only being covered at the $500,000. Because again, in a situation of property damage, you would not be covered for this difference. So let's go over some of the key takeaways that we have about property insurance. Number 1 is that commercial property insurance protects physical assets. Things like the actual building, the equipment, and the inventory that's inside of the building. 2 is commercial property is essential for the operation of businesses with physical locations. And number 3 that I didn't include over here is to make sure that you consider additional endorsements before picking your commercial property insurance. And that's just things that are not usually covered by a basic commercial property policy. Number 4 is to know common exclusions like flood, earthquake, and theft, which would usually require a completely separate insurance policy. Number 5 is to consider add-ons for full protection. And again, that's anything like the additional endorsements or any of these additional policies if you are in a flood zone, if you're in an area that has frequent earthquakes, or if you're in an area that has high crime. And the final thing that you want to do is to match your policy limits to the actual value of the property at the current date. And here's the final and bonus tip that I promised you guys at the beginning of this video. And that is to keep an updated record of your inventory and maintenance of your equipment. So anything like photos, receipts, and updated lists to simplify your claims process and to make sure that you're not getting claims denials, because that's the worst thing that you could possibly experience within your business. Nothing is worse than paying the premiums for your policy and then being denied when it comes time to file the claim. And again, if you need any help with your commercial property or any other commercial insurance needs, please contact us at quotes.commercialinsurance.io/total risk protocol, and we'll see what we can do to help you out. Thank you for watching.